is give you an historical perspective on why Law Day came about and the reason that it should go forward. Now, most of you, I assume, are 16, 17 years old. And what I refer to living history during your lifetimes. You may have been aware early in your life, 5, 6, 7 years of age, with the collapse and fall of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party in Russia, or the Soviet Union. The fall of the Berlin Wall. As an anecdote, I served in military service for 2 years in 71 and 73 in West Berlin, Germany. When the wall was in existence, the wall was real. There were killings on the wall, people trying to escape from East Germany, East Berlin into the West. I was a military policeman, so I'm well aware of the significance of the existence of the wall and the fall of that wall, in personal experience. But in your lifetimes, your life history, you don't know those things. That's textbook history to you. But like World War II, in Europe, in Latvia, Estonia, in their own republics, by military, matched against that all the what are now democracies. There wasn't any battles, there weren't any fires, but it was real. Delivering a speech to the United Nations, to the West, and specifically to the United Economic System, we were in War 62 when presidential crisis. So in Cuba, and miles away from the southern tip of Florida, the ballistic missiles aimed at our cities, mass destruction. It was in my lifetime. The Soviet Union started getting, continued right through, at least to the satellite countries that it controlled, that they were in control, and that any effort to break away from their control of the Communist Party would be brutally put down and eradicated by the massive force of the Red Army. Hungary in 1956 is a great example. The country was invaded, occupied, and continued that way until the fall of communism in the 1990s. That was the scene that presented itself to Charles Ryan when he got the idea that we as a democracy, we as a capitalist society, should do something to counteract these threats, this barbarism of threats of massive retaliation and armed dominance. He came up with the idea of law to explain and educate both to our citizens and to the citizens of the rest of the country, specifically to the Eastern Bloc, so that they would understand that there is an alternative. The alternative would not be a display of military might, even though we have that. The process would be an education process on the rule of law, the rights of man, and government by popular election. That puts Law Day more in a historical perspective. But merely because merely because the Soviet Union is no longer that nuclear military threat that it once was, and you don't have that specter of annihilation hanging over you like our fathers and our generation did, there's no reason to believe that Law Day is less significant. It still retains its significance. But most of the rights and liberties that you understand we have as American citizens, of course you all know are founded in our Constitution. The history of our country starts what year? Declaration of Independence? 1776, right? The Revolutionary War was fought and ended in 1783, Treaty of Ghent. Most of us think that was a big event in world history if we fail to remember that there was a worldwide conflict during that time, a conflict between the British Empire, the French Empire, and the clash in Europe and the North American continent. Our American Revolution was just kind of sidelined and not too significant. We had to fight the British again in 1812 to convince that something happened in 1776 or 1783. But the point is, we didn't become a nation until 1783. A constitutional form of government took place in what year? Constitution, the first 10 amendments ratified by the 13 original colonies. 1789, correct. So from 1789, less than 250 years ago, is when the basic document that that assures us of our rights and liberties as Americans came into effect. We fought a civil war in 1865 to 68. Several amendments were added to the Constitution. 13th, outlawing slavery. The 14th, the protection due process clause was applied to the states. 13th and 14th Amendments in 1865 or 1868, one of those 2 years. That is 150 years ago. Those are the basic documents. The Constitution, the Fifth Amendment of the original Constitution, the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, that combined form the basis for all of the laws that we now have in effect, all of the Supreme Court cases that identify, pronounce our rights and liberties, and the laws that protect our rights and liberties. They all emanate from those times. But look how long it took to actually get them in place on the books to enforce and for the courts to recognize them. Slavery was outlawed by the 13th Amendment in 1865 or 1868. The Fifth Amendment's been around since 1789, the 14th essentially after the Civil War. But when did the Supreme Court outlaw discrimination officially by striking down the separate but equal laws of the states concerning the separation of the races? Anybody have an idea? 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education of the People of Kansas. 1954, almost 100 years after the 13th Amendment was enacted. The significance of that, the population wasn't ready. The political theory, the constitutional underpinnings were always there, but the people weren't ready. The Supreme Court anticipated the public acceptance of these principles and advanced them. Most of you are all familiar with the criminal justice system and the rights that individuals have in that criminal justice system. The right to remain silent, you know, the typical, you have the right to remain silent, you can say will be used against you in court of law, you have a right to attorney, if you can't afford an attorney, one will provide for you at no cost. What are they called? Miranda rights, exactly. Where did they date from? 1963, excellent. Excellent. There's a Miranda versus the state of Arizona, I believe. Another Supreme Court case in 1963. Gideon versus Wainwright. Right to counsel at early stage of criminal proceedings. All of those cases announced by the Warren, Chief Justice Earl Warren from California, was the Chief Justice that led these things, took place in the 60s. This was the Supreme Court leading the public, ahead of the public, ahead of the citizens, in announcing that we have these rights and we're going to protect them. We're going to recognize them. The courts can't protect it. The courts recognize it. The protection comes from the executive branch and legislation. Congress did follow up, but when? Segregation was pronounced unconstitutional in 1954. It took the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, the March on Selma, Alabama, the sittings at the lunch counters, Rose Parks refusing to sit in the back of the bus. All of these things, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the integration, forced integration by Alabama's National Guard, sent by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy to Alabama against George Wallace in Alabama. It took all those things, and the assassination of Robert Kennedy is a direct result of that, in my humble opinion. All of those things that took that before we enacted our civil rights legislation in 1967 under Lyndon Johnson. 13 years after the Board of Education versus People of Kansas. Then the public was ready to accept those principles. The public was ready to elect officials who would enact those anti-discrimination laws and the civil rights laws that we now have and are enforced without. It's in our lifetime. Old, established, historical, very recent rights. They still need protecting. Nuclear holocaust may be lessened. The threat of that may be lessened. Look around the world. Look at the conflicts. The alternative to our equal justice under law, the rule of law, is what you see in other parts of the world. We still have every incentive to protect those concepts. It's going to be up to you to embrace them, to understand them, to protect them, and to propagate them for your children and your children's children. It's a burden that you're going to have to bear. The alternative is unacceptable. I hope you bear that burden well. Law Day has a meaning. It's education. You should continue to learn about equal justice under law, the rule of law, not the rule of man, equal access to the courts to enforce that equal justice under law, and to perpetuate it for your children. Thank you.
Thank you.